Yep, so tell us more about the Wisdom Archive. What is it and why do we need it?
Okay, the Wisdom Archive is a response to modern life, and by that I mean that a lot of people feel lost and confused about their identity and about how they're approaching their life. In fact, there's a lot of people who've retired from their jobs who don't know what to do with themselves and have often not allowed themselves the luxury of asking significant questions like, who am I, or what do I really want? You know, there's that famous question that a good therapist always asks the patient, which is, what would you do if money was not an object? And this opens up a plethora of things. The archive is there to answer the question. Now, that question in the olden days, among the royal houses and among the upper classes, that was a question that was allowed to be asked because people had leisure time. We keep people busy working, so if they have these odd moments of leisure or pauses in their life, they have the opportunity to halt, pause, and ask themselves the question, is this what I want? Is this the life I want? Why am I here? And eventually they'll get to this question of who am I and why am I feeling this way? And what happens is people evolve to this idea of examining their life. And in modern life, because of the inundation of information, people have gotten numbed out. And so they'll just turn away from technology sometimes and they'll just say, I want to know why I'm here. I want to feel something. I want to do something that is on a human scale that I can perceive layers of in myself. People are wanting to taste life back in the organic, natural, real way, not just through technology. We've really got a split forming. So this split in forming of who am I and what do I want, the archive is to address the split and to say, look, we have 3,000 to 5,000 years of culture, art, craft, storytelling, movement, medicine, gardening. We have completely elaborated high cultural traditions in all of these formats that people can get access to through mentoring or apprenticing with someone who's inherited a tradition. So the archive is an archive in that we have a tradition. It's a school in that there are teachers. But it's a school of initiation in that we offer something schools don't offer anymore, and that's one-on-one instruction from a master or an expert who will take a personal interest in the student. This then gives something very significant to the student, which is a rite of passage. At any age, stages of learning, stages of epiphany, we're trying to return value back to people who are asking questions, the essential human questions in the population.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I see the archive right now, is this meeting of a modern need and this solution to the essential human questions.
How do you liken it to a museum?
Well, because the people themselves have inherited teaching and training, what the Buddhists sometimes call transmissions as well as instructions. It's a living archive in that the teachers represent living traditions. Now, what they bring with them is tools. And some of them bring tools that have been handed down. And that includes sacred objects, paintings, tankas, icons, or inherited costumes, or inherited costume designs, or musical instruments, inherited traditions of guildcraft or candle making, or how do you sew a quilt, or how do you operate a loom to make a Persian rug. All these things have been handed down. So we have this idea that a human being, in a sense, is a book, a library, is in fact a living museum. And so the idea of working with someone who is a living museum is it gives you a taste of genuine cultural education because you're learning from a human being in a multidimensional way, because they're multidimensional like you. And you're not in a class of 20, you're in a class of 2 or 3. So the personal touch enters into this teacher-student relationship, and it's that relationship which is the primary transforming element in the archive. And that's our claim to fame, is that we give students an opportunity to apprentice with teachers who are carrying a museum-level tradition.
So tell me about the wisdom traditions that you're most interested in and targeting in the archive.
Well, we start with tracking, which is not just tracking an animal, but tracking yourself. And tracking is about knowing what you are after and knowing what is required to get it. So although we look at it from the native tradition, which is I am tracking an animal, or I am looking for a medicinal plant on a mountainside, and I have to find a way to get to that. A lot of times medicinal herbs are picked at particular times in particular regions because the quality, as with wine, is affected by region and time. So the art of tracking is generally where we start because the principles of tracking apply to all the other departments, which are the Department of the Garden, the Department of the Kitchen, which includes cooking as well as kitchen tools, as well as food prep, as well as recipes. That then goes to storytelling, because after eating, people tell stories. Storytelling is an art that goes into the full theatrical drama of Shakespeare, which is costume making, instrument accompaniment, memorization of lines, stagecraft, you name it. Story entails all of religion and all of irreligion because everything's a conversation. And after story, we have dance, because sometimes people want to get up and dance when they're telling a story to express what the story is about. And dance, of course, trespasses into martial arts and yoga, which, because they're therapeutic or they're based on survival and health, they trespass into medicine, as does the kitchen. A lot of the medicines that people have evolved over time have come directly out of the forest and directly out of the kitchen. And besides medicine, there's a spiritual function which I would roughly call shamanism. But all that means is people have mystical experiences in all walks of life, and often regardless of what they believe intellectually. And we're interested in these experiences, and we're interested in people having these experiences because we in the archive have found these experiences are what give life meaning. Mm-hmm. So that's a sort of round robin on the different departments. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you talk about the wisdom archive being a living process. You mean between the student and the teacher?
Between the student and the teacher, it's a living process because you're working out a relationship. It's also a living process because if you go around the archive, you're figuring out the principles of how life works in any one of the 9 categories. So you're learning how to live by people who have learned traditions of living. Now, in that process of learning is the living process. So there's several layers going on. One is you're learning about a thing, a craft, an art. But the other aspect is because there's 2 of you having a conversation, there's the broader aspect of learning about life itself. Oh, this is how it works. Because many people have not put themselves in the position of actually apprenticing with someone who knows something in a very deep and profound way. And someone that studied a subject their entire life and then comes to you to teach you brings an entire life of culture to the equation. And they're then in the field of the student downloading this rich repository of information and experience as a human being, not as a machine ejecting thousands of facts that may or may not be useful, but as one human being speaking to another, specifically person to person. This is the lacking place in society now, is the person-to-person educational contact.
Also, too, I think there's a lot of lack in culture, and there's been a long trajectory of culture declining because of modernization. And this is not just in America, this is worldwide.
Well, yeah,
So how have you found the wisdom keepers, the people actually still living out these traditions?
Well, these dinosaurs exist, and sometimes they exist in niches. Sometimes they're people who have had a hobby their entire life, or they've studied something on the side, or they've dedicated their life to the task of preserving a tradition, in the same way a person would dedicate their life to preserving antiques or an old book. We can find these people if we look for them. Sometimes they don't want to be found, but sometimes through the Bush telegraph, you can find them through talking to others who are interested in the same subject. So we have been able to find people who are experts in all the basic fields all over the world. A lot of them don't get any publicity. So the only way you find them is through other people with a common interest. So there are these networks and layers throughout society, but they don't get much press. And they're not fully operational in the virtual world either, because the nature of their work requires them to not be in the virtual world.
Right. So how do you see the Wisdom Archive growing? How do you see it evolving, and how are you going to bring this out to the world?
Well, on the documentary side, what we'd like to do is take the audience through a whole learning protocol with a master teacher and let them have an experience of the layers of learning and interpersonal relationships with the teacher as they go through the process of a tradition. And if they go through the full scale and they're initiated in the tradition and they come out the other side knowing the tradition, the documentary would allow the audience to get a taste of what is now the missing process in life, which is the learning that comes through, one, a historical tradition, two, through a living human being who's carrying the tradition, and three, through that relationship between the two, which is rarely allowed to develop now between people.
I'm not sure why they declined. I mean, can you tell me more about why you think that the erosion of culture and wisdom traditions declined over time? Obviously, it's modernism, but if your belief is that they really are the key to transcendental experiences, but better yet, just actually knowing oneself, or actually being closer to identifying your meaning in life, your purpose in life, why have they eroded over time? And why would the modern person be interested in that? Are they not too far gone, too modernized, too AI oriented?
Well, I would say on that front particularly, what's happened since Descartes is the slanting toward materialism, which is only what's measurable is real. Now, what that means is life is only as real as the instruments that you can measure it with. And if your instruments, one, are not subtle enough, or two, you simply don't have them, then there are whole gaps of life, and that means human experiencing that is missing. So as the scientific method evolved and materialism turned into a way of life and technology improved, machinery, industry, moving from steam to fossil fuel to electricity to computers, this whole process of the evolution of technology in human society, it had a drawing effect on the attention of the public because it was very much part of the economy. So as people became more and more involved with machines and the productivity around machines and technology and the productivity around all different kinds of technology, virtual included, they were pulled away from how they felt because the machine has no feelings. So if you work with machines extensively, you become more like a machine because you're simply not working with other human beings. And there are people who say, I'm great with machines, I'm not great with human beings. And they admit that. And those people usually are very good craftspeople. They're good at making things and not interacting directly with human beings. There have always been people like that. I have no qualm with that. That's the nature of the human being. The qualm of a lot of people who are searching for meaning in their life and for a meaningful sensation or meaningful human experiences is that they are finding machines cannot give that. So we have a suicide rate, we have a stress rate, we have people who feel very alienated and disconnected from the human community at large. We have a virtual community with a high suicide rate. We have a virtual community with a high liability rate. And a lot of people are simply not even leaving their houses. They're just living between their computer and maybe taking their dog for a walk. And this is accelerated, of course, post-COVID and all that. People got so withdrawn and so introverted that they eventually habituated that. And they were encouraged to do so for reasons of safety. You can't blame them for that. But now that this shift has moved, people are beginning to feel like they want more satisfaction. They're hungry for meaning. They want to have a more satisfying life. They want to have a more active life. They want to have a more visceral life. They want to have experiences. So there's now this reaction. And a lot of people are questioning the mechanical existence that technology has placed upon them. Mm-hmm. And so we now have a population, including people among the young, who want to have living physical lives that are not fully defined by machinery. Mm-hmm.